People are going to start logging in. You'll see that participant numbers really start to go up. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. We're just going to wait a few minutes for everyone to log in, and then we'll get started. And then I will do. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. This is Network Selib On Demand. I'm Liz Jones, the Blue Star Family's Operations Manager, and your host for today. If you're joining us via our Zoom platform and you have a question, you can ask it using the question and answer box or the chat feature. If you're joining us via Facebook Live, just go ahead and ask your question in the comments, and I'll make sure that I bring it forward. We really want this to be interactive, so go ahead and ask any questions that might come to mind. Today we're really excited because we're kind of taking this outside of the box a little bit and venturing into a career space that we never really thought of. So we're very excited to have the Executive Director of NOVA, Chief Justice Barajas, and Deputy Executive Director Clair Selb to talk about careers in victim advocacy and how those careers can work for military spouses. In the description of in the Facebook description and in the chat feature in a few moments, I'm going to post a link to a folder that has the official biography for the Chief Justice and a PowerPoint presentation on NOVA if you want to know more. Please feel free to view those whenever you'd like. So let's go ahead and get started. Chief Justice, can you tell us about NOVA and what the organization does?
Liz, thank you so much for the opportunity to address your membership. The National Organization for Victim Assistance was founded in 1975. It is our nation's largest and oldest victim advocacy group in this country. It is comprised of members as diverse as the oceans and the skies that we see all over the world. We pride ourselves in a number of things. One is the programs that we offer by way of live virtual programs under the guidance of our Deputy Director, Clair Selb. And the second thing is the crisis response team training. We'll talk about that in detail, but let me say this, and it's important to understand that what we're talking about is a mission of NOVA to assist victims of crime, victims of mass casualties, and survivors of natural disasters to help normalize what is an otherwise abnormal circumstance in their life. So, for example, we're often called to respond to mass shootings like the Las Vegas, Nevada shooting, Sandy Hook, Parkland, Florida, send teams to 9/11, all with the effort to help normalize and stabilize communities by delivering disaster relief in the form of emotional first aid. It is an area that one must, as a prerequisite, have a true deep passion for wanting to help people heal. And I can't think of a better cross-section of our country than the dependents of military personnel. I mean, because they see it from both ends. So that's what NOVA does in general. We'll talk specifically about programs, how specifically you can get involved in all of this, but I also want to tell you how it impacted me here later in a bit. So with that, Liz, we can turn it over to Claire to talk about specific programs.
Wonderful. Thank you, sir. And thank you, Liz and Blue Star families, for hosting NOVA today. I have to say, on a very personal level, my sister is a proud Navy spouse, an active member of Blue Star families, both been staff and volunteers, and it's a just wonderful organization, all that you all are doing to support military spouses. Thank you also to everyone who joined us today. For those of you who are hearing about victim advocacy for the first time and careers in victim advocacy, let me just say, you know, one of the reasons that Chief Justice Barajas and I have been personally interested in reaching out to military audiences to include spouses is because this is a career that is highly portable, that you can enter into with a few essential skills, training, and a passion for helping others, as Chief Justice Barajas said. So I think it's oftentimes a very good fit for military spouses with relocations and PCS changes. And on a personal level also, prior to coming to NOVA, I worked for 7 years with the Department of Defense and Army, standing up their sexual assault and victim advocacy programs, where I had the pleasure of employing hundreds of military spouses under a large contract. So I saw really firsthand there, how it could really be a good fit in terms of career-wise. In terms of our programs at NOVA, very briefly, as Chief Justice Barajas said, we do not provide direct services. We really see our mission as providing training and credentialing and support to the victim advocates, the positions that we're going to be talking to you about today, the victim advocates who are on the ground in community agencies like domestic violence shelters, rape crisis centers, as well as in system-based agencies such as criminal justice agencies, with law enforcement, with the FBI, working side by side with those professionals to advocate for all victims of crime. So that's what we do here on a daily basis, and that's what we're here to talk to you about today.
Thanks, Claire. So before we got started, we actually, with the invitation, we asked people to send in questions that they might have. So I kind of just wanted to branch a little bit into that. One of the main things, especially with military spouses, is a career in victim advocacy portable? Can it be virtual? Can it be flexible?
Claire, you want to take a first stab at that?
Yes. So as I said, one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you is absolutely addresses that question. It's a highly portable career. So you find victim advocates, and the field has really grown over the past 30 years. You find victim advocates in agencies throughout your community. So we have what we call both community-based advocates, and those are victim advocates who are located in community agencies like domestic violence shelters, rape crisis centers, child advocacy centers, as well as you have system-based advocates. And those are the positions that are located within the criminal justice system, oftentimes in district attorneys' offices with law enforcement. We also, over the past 15 years, have seen this huge growth in victim advocacy within the military. And within the military, of course, we have active duty victim advocates, but we also have GS civilian and contract positions. And these are located at military installations around the world. One of the things I worked really hard on when I was managing a contract of family advocacy program, victim advocates for the Army and for the Navy, was making sure that if you started with us at Fort Bragg and you were suddenly PCS'd to Fort Irwin, that we tried to work with you to find a position so that you could continue to do the work that you love. So in that sense, I think it's just a great fit. The question about virtual opportunities, I hear everyone in terms of always wanting virtual opportunities as a working mom myself, and balancing work life. There are virtual opportunities. They may be more limited, frankly, particularly at the entry level. I would say more virtual opportunities consist of, education, training, really a lot of what I am doing at the program management level of victim advocates. There also are sometimes virtual opportunities, depending upon the community you're in, with some hotlines, for example, sexual assault hotlines and such, use virtual volunteers. But generally at the entry level, you've got to put in the work and you've got to be on the ground in terms of usually responding to victims within an agency.
Thank you. Thank you so
much.
Let
me, if I may, Liz, let me expound on that a little bit. First, let me emphasize that the field of victim services is such a broad, open field to everybody who may be listening and anybody who will listen to any of your listeners. And if there's been the constant criticism of me throughout my professional life is that I can go from 0 to professorial in 1.2 seconds. So having warned you, let me say this to your listeners. Number one, if you have a passion to help people, and I can't emphasize that enough, anybody in victim services cannot emotionally be tied into their work part-time. You have to have a true passion. So when you step into an instance, it is every bit of you. And if you don't have that passion, then victim services, in my opinion, is simply not the best fit for you. I've been with NOVA since 1987. I stumbled into NOVA immediately after the murder of my older brother in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was NOVA that propelled me into public service, that had me run as a district attorney, having me create the first victims program in West Texas, and in marrying my victim coordinator. So victim advocacy, believe me, is in our blood. It was victim advocacy that put me on the Texas appellate bench, and today I'm the executive director of NOVA. Ladies and gentlemen, I would not be here if I didn't have a passion for what I do, and who I believe in can follow in our footsteps. It's people like you. It's that simple. The question now to ask yourself, how do you get there? Everybody had to start somewhere. And let me suggest this. First, you go to our website. It's trinova.org for general information. There are many entities that put pieces of victimization, victimology, victim services out there for you. NOVA, I'm very proud to say, is pretty much one-stop shopping. If you have an interest in helping people, then you can be guided toward taking courses that are virtual in nature through our academy with subject matter experts from all over the world, instructing people from all over the world on principles of victim services, victimology, victimization. Having done that, that puts you on a course toward credentialing. I am so proud to say that with all of the accomplishments that I have attained in my life, the most significant accomplishment is that I am today a credentialed victim advocate under the NACP. You know, so I can stand toe to toe with people in courthouses by telling them I am a credentialed victim advocate. Forget the fact that I'm a chief justice, okay, or a former DA. I am a credentialed victim advocate. If you are adamant in wanting to help people and follow a course like that, it is phenomenally mobile with you. You can be your partner may be transferred to Fort Bliss, Texas. There are opportunities to work at domestic violence shelters in El Paso, my hometown, by the way. Opportunities to perhaps volunteer for the district attorney's office, victims program. All DAs have such a program. Sheriff's Department, sexual assaults. They're always looking for people. And let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, as a former district attorney, if you walked into my office and wanted to volunteer and told me that you have been taking training in victim advocacy, you are credentialed, you would go to the top of that list automatically. Because that tells me that you are committed and you are passionate. So to get into that pipeline, that's where I would start. Liz?
Thank you, sir. Claire, do you have anything to add?
I would just add on to, I think Chief Justice Barajas has summed it up very nicely, as always. I think, you know, when you're thinking about if this is the first time you've ever thought about how would I get into this career, we get a lot of questions about that. You know, is it education? What are people looking for? And I can say, having been on the hiring side many times, you know, that passion for helping others has to be communicated. And one of the best ways that you can communicate it and get great experience is volunteering. The number one thing I would say is if you have no experience, but you have an interest in entering this career, even finding out, is this a good fit for me? Because victim advocacy is both, you know, I always say one of the best and most exhilarating jobs you can have. It's also emotionally hard working with victims and survivors of crime each day. So finding out about volunteer opportunities, and all community agencies for the most part rely really heavily on volunteers due to budget constraints. So you contact your local sexual assault agency, domestic violence agency, whatever your area of passion is, they will absolutely have a volunteer program. You will probably get free training with that. And you're slowly building your network so that if you decide to make it a career, if you decide to look for a paid position, you not only can add that experience immediately to the top of your resume, but you're also building contacts.
Yes.
It is remarkably portable, remarkably. You know, and then as Claire has said, from a management perspective, you know, it is. We often here at Novo have requests for people to come volunteer, but I'm talking about people that are not in the victims field necessarily, whether they're interns or volunteers. Anybody that is in management, whether it's a local domestic violence shelter, a DA's office, if they are in management, it is very difficult to drop everything and perform on-the-job training for a number of people. As much as we would love to do it, you know, the life is at times can be very hectic, and we just don't have the time that you deserve. You knock on our door, and we know by looking at your resume that if anything, what you have, you've accomplished the core curriculum to become credentialed on the provisional level. You got my attention, because I know that I can give you an assignment that with limited assistance, you should be able to pick up a telephone for in crisis response circumstances. I mean, you are so marketable in this very specific field.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, I think one of the questions that came in was, what does a typical day look like for a victim advocate? And it seems like there's so many different paths. I mean, if you could choose, you know, just like one or two maybe and expand on that.
Claire, why don't you talk about everything but this week? We don't want to scare them.
Well, I'll talk about one of my favorite jobs was I worked at a hospital-based sexual assault center. Actually in Prince George's County, Maryland, for those of you who are familiar with the area. And one of the reasons it was one of my favorite jobs was because every day was different. So it's hard to describe a quote unquote typical day, but I enjoyed working as part of a multidisciplinary team. Our sexual assault center was right off the emergency room. My coworker used to say, you know, it felt like we were an ER, because at any given time, we could be responding to a sexual assault victim who showed up at the emergency room, working with law enforcement who were coming over to investigate, coordinating with the sexual assault forensic nurse, and just providing general information, support, resources to that victim. You know, if you think about it and you try and put yourself in their shoes, if you have not been a victim of crime or if you don't know someone who has been, one of the things that I think resonates and is really true with almost every victim of crime I've worked with is the aftermath can be so incredibly overwhelming as different people and agencies are all coming at you, asking different things from you. And navigating that process is often the burden is placed upon a victim who's already been through an incredible trauma. So your role is really being that solely dedicated person who's there and available to help prepare the victim. Tell them, you know, next you're going to be going in for the forensic exam. This is what it's going to look like. Next, you're going to be meeting with law enforcement. If you want, I can be present. Here's the type of questions you might hear. Here's what you can expect next in terms of follow-on. You get to be, and I think this is really a privilege, and that's why I say it is, you get to be that single point of contact to support and empower that victim to begin their unique healing journey.
Liz, let me make two observations, if you don't mind. The first is from as a former elected prosecutor, certainly as a former jurist, from my perspective, a day in the life of a victim advocate would entail court escort, for example. It would entail, before you even get to court, and by analogy, you would coordinate with law enforcement victim advocates who will have stabilized the victim, the community, perhaps victim's small community. There would have been a handoff to a prosecutor's office. If you were a volunteer in a prosecutor's office, then that case file would have been assigned to you. Your job is to contact the victim. By that time, we're making all the assumptions that you've had the training that you need. You will certainly inform the victim of all of the rights that they would have that perhaps may not have been told to them, one of which is information. You would give them the information you could consistent with what the prosecutors want to release. You would help them with victims' compensation that they may be entitled to. You would make referrals to other mental health specialists if need be. If the case goes on through the court system, you would escort the victim and the victim's family through the entire court system. You would be their eyes and their ears to help stabilize the family. I will tell you from personal experience, when my brother was murdered, if it wasn't for the Victim Assistance Program and their volunteers in Albuquerque, New Mexico, who drove from Albuquerque to El Paso 4.5 hours to meet with my mom and my siblings to stabilize us, to make us feel confident that the DA in Albuquerque had our best interests at heart, who walked us through every day of the court proceedings to explain to us what it is that is going to happen, what is going to happen next, what's going to happen to the evidence, that had it been for them, we would never have been stable. And I say that, ladies and gentlemen, because at the time, I was a very successful criminal defense lawyer. But when I became a victim, it was like taking an eraser and wiping my brain because I was dysfunctional. And then the second thing that I want to emphasize is that when I say it's not for everybody, they work at different levels. Your level of trust is going to be consistent with your level of expertise that you gain as you go. Claire moments ago mentioned crisis response call centers. Very, very critical in this big picture. Very important. And then the last thing I want to mention is never define a victim. Let the victim define themselves. Because what I might consider a victim may not be what the victim considers a victim. And let me give you an example. This past week, last week, our family suffered a tragedy in that I had an older sister that was killed in an automobile accident. It was a civil issue, but the reaction from my brother-in-law was every bit consistent as if he were a survivor of a homicide. Under normal circumstances, nobody would have talked to him because he wasn't a crime victim as defined by statute. I found myself talking to him and my family and providing crisis response, one of the training vehicles that we have at NOVA, and explained to my brother-in-law, Mike, in response to his question was, is it okay for me to cry? I have heard that over and over and over again from male victims in my life. Somebody needed to tell him it is perfectly normal to cry. And we walked through that. That is what victim services providers do every day. Liz?
Thanks for sharing that with us, sir. I actually have a few more questions that have come in. One of them is about, it's an active duty military spouse. She's been a military spouse for 8 years and lived in 3 different states, which is, that's pretty average for military spouses. She is saying here that she's worked in victim advocacy in every state that she lived in, but there were no openings for professional advocates. And there were always part-time and volunteer positions open, but she had such an issue that she decided to go back and complete her master's degree so she could be more marketable. Is there any suggestions there as far as like making yourself more marketable, or, kind of ins and roads that are tips and tricks that you may know?
Claire, I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Claire.
Let me first start by saying I'm very empathetic. I've watched my sister, trying to navigate having a career as a military spouse. And absolutely, it's challenging when you're relocating. That being said, I think that even, and I go back to, and I'll say again, even if it's a volunteer position, and I know that's challenging, you know, sometimes financially, but starting with that volunteer or that part-time position to build that network, and then having and requesting, you know, and even an informational interview with, you know, whether it be the director or whoever the hiring person is within that agency, to say, here's my background, here's my interest, here's my passion, this is why I want to do this, this is the experience I have, this is the training I've gone ahead and received. And they may say to you, it's true, you know, we don't have any full-time openings here. And so then taking it a step further, you know, do you know of other agencies within the community where it might be a fit? Because again, as Chief Justice Barajas mentioned, sometimes it's also thinking outside the box, beyond just, you know, the domestic violence shelter and the rape crisis center, to think about what other community agencies employ victim advocates. And I see, Liz, you've shared our slide deck. I also tried to put on the slide deck a number of different resources nationally to look at, but I would start with having those conversations. And if you're moving to a new area, you know, the world of victim advocacy is relatively small. And so, you know, I know myself, if I was your director and you'd been volunteering with me diligently for 1.5 years or 2 years, and you told me, you know what, now I'm moving to Vicenza, or now I'm moving to, you know, as Fort Bliss, I would try to, you know, one, I absolutely offer you a reference letter, but then two, see, do I know anyone in that community that I could potentially connect you with and do a warm handoff and introduce you to the director of, you know, an agency there. So even though you're moving, your network can move with you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Liz, if I had the magic wand, I would have organizations such as Blue Star and others partner with us to be able to fine tune and hone resumes from your listeners. You know, it is the field of victim services is a field that many of the managers and funding sources don't understand. You know, ladies and gentlemen, you would be surprised when I have lectured to elected district attorneys where they do not know, by their own admission, they have a victim's office, but they do not know what victim advocates do day to day. It might sound amazing, but they don't know. County supervisors, county commissioners who formulate budgets for these organizations, you would be surprised how many don't know what victim advocates do on a day-to-day basis. Now, I say that because if your resume simply says I was a victim advocate, then what you're doing, you're delivering a resume to somebody who doesn't know what the position is. Now, if you have taken courses and, you know, and you cannot use us as a yardstick because we know what it is. We're managers. We know what we look for. The yardstick has to be less than 1 inch high. You have to play to those people who don't know what you do. To be able to say that you have taken courses on death notification, on responding to survivors of homicide, on implicit bias, on hate crimes, on dealing with survivors of child abuse. When you can detail those kinds of things, you get what I always describe in a resume or in an essay as the wow factor. That your resume has to be delivered, and the immediate reaction has to be wow. Mm-hmm. If you don't have the wow factor, we need to sit down and we have to scrub that up, because that is your entree into the field. It's that simple. Everybody and anybody wants a volunteer that you don't have to spend a lot of time training, who is the wow factor. Now, let's shift gears for a second. Let's talk about people, because I get this question all the time. How do I work for a district attorney's office? Or how do I work for a law enforcement agency? The sad truth to those kinds of positions, paid positions, they're largely based on politics. People that know people that know people. But the trick is how do you get into volunteer? Because once you can get into volunteer, I assure you, you will be able to lead without a title. And that's what you need.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that we always say, especially in the military spouse career space, is like if you find your passion, volunteer, and it'll probably lead to a full-time job.
That's true.
Start there. Switching gears a little bit, I did get a question that came in about just training in general, where they guess they were poking around on the NOVA website and they saw that I see you offer a number of classes. Which one do you recommend someone start with?
Claire?
As a starting baseline class, I would recommend the NOVA Victim Assistance Academy. It's a 40-hour training on all of the core competencies for victim advocates. It is also pre-approved by the National Advocate Credentialing Program, so at the end of the course, you can take your certificate and you can go ahead and apply to be professionally credentialed through the National Advocate Credentialing Program. And another huge advantage with it, it's a virtual class. So it's 40 hours. It occurs over a 9-week period. We offer it twice a year, but you can do it from any location in the world.
Twice a day also.
Twice a day, right, yeah. So there's a lot of, and part of the reason we do offer it twice a day is we recognize that our advocates are all over the world, and we want to make sure that we're accessible, available to you. That being said, I really encourage you, obviously, I think the NOVA classes are wonderful and slightly biased to them. But that being said, there's a number of different training opportunities out there for you, both virtual and in person. Check out the Office for Victims of Crime. They have some free online courses that are wonderful and self-paced, as well as RAIN. For those of you who are not familiar with it, it's the largest anti-sexual violence organization in the country. It has a specific training for its hotline operators. And then if you look, every single state in the United States has a state domestic violence and sexual assault coalition. They usually offer comprehensive trainings. In addition to local agencies, oftentimes offer, as I said before, free trainings for volunteers.
Now, do you need any sort of education level to start with, like a base level? Sometimes you need like a bachelor's degree or an associate's degree, or can you just jump right in and get the certification?
So there's no, and I think this is one of the challenges with victim advocacy because people enter from so many different directions. There's no one educational background that's a perfect fit for victim advocacy. Most agencies, as the field has become professionalized, will require a minimum of a bachelor's degree. Sometimes it's a bonus if you have a master's, but absolutely not required. Bachelors in the social sciences and psychology and social work and such, they tend to be looked upon favorably. That being said, I graduated with a bachelor's in English. I had a lot of volunteer experience, and I got a job at a domestic violence organization right out of college. So there's really a range, and that's where I say, the education is important. The volunteering, the passion, the specific training is even more important in my mind.
My degree is in sociology. Took a lot of courses in social psychology, things of that nature. But I agree with Claire. There's no one degree. I think what we are finding, though, is that they're not big numbers, but there are a number of victim service offices, to my mind, mostly with prosecutor-based programs, that for employees, they would require, as a minimum level for entry, a bachelor's degree. That's not the prevailing view, but there are some that require that. There are others, for example, for anybody who may be in the state of Arizona, if you wanted to work at the Maricopa County Prosecutor's Office, everybody there has to be credentialed. So my mission that I've undertaken in the past year is to educate prosecutors and judges on the professionalization of victim advocacy. And what that simply means is if you were a victim advocate in the world today, credential, I need to make sure that judges and prosecutors see you equal as if you were the defense lawyer, the prosecutor, the interpreter, the bailiff. So we have to get everybody up to that level, but education alone won't get you there. I think, in my view, it's going to be the experience that you can show that you've undertaken.
Thank you, sir. Claire, do you have anything to add?
No, that was great. Thank you.
All right, we did get one more. I think we have time for one more question. It's a long one, but here it is. It says, I recently completed the basic 40-hour requirement to get credentialed. I started volunteering at a local sexual assault center 4 years ago, and I worked my way up to now working as a crime victim advocate at our county prosecutor's office. My question is that I have a lot of previous training over these 4 years, and I have my certificates to show that I've completed them. Am I able to submit that with my application for credentialing for specialized training?
Absolutely. That's an easy answer.
Great answer.
And I'm going to type in the chat box. We were talking a lot about credentialing today, and the credentialing program. So there is only one national civilian credentialing program for victim advocates. It's called the National Advocate Credentialing Program. Information, the website. And the reason that I think professional credentialing is so important is as we see this field continue to grow, for military spouses who are looking for mobility, for looking for portable careers, it's a way to demonstrate to agencies as you move around the country, around the world, that you have met basic requirements for training, for education, that you signed off on ethical guidelines for responding to victim advocates, and you can continue to grow in the credentialing field. So you join and become credentialed at the most basic level, which is called provisional. And as you get more and more experience, it recognizes your experience. So I won't go into too much detail on that. I put the website there, I put my email, and you can feel free to email me with questions and I'll connect you with our credentialing coordinator. But absolutely, it sounds like you have great experience to whoever answered, whoever asked that question, and you can apply all of that training and experience, including volunteer experience, to becoming credentialed.
Thank you so much, Claire. We do have time for one more question. Actually, it's from somebody who is active duty Army and retiring in 2 years. When should they start looking for a career as a victim advocate?
Yesterday.
I knew the answer, but I was just going to let you say it, sir.
Well, and Claire, if I may, you got to get smart. I think you have to decide, do you want to stay in the field? Number one. Number two, can you afford to stay in the field? That's a big question, because the field is now much more stabilized than when Claire and I first came into the field. Victim service providers today, for the most part, don't support themselves with bake sales like they did 20 years ago. So, it's much more stable. But those are serious questions. Can you afford to do that? Because we often hear from these people, I really want to stay. I want to stay in the field, but I'm not sure I can afford it. That's a tough decision. It really is. And then the other thing is that where do you want to relocate? You're going to be separating. Set aside for a second victim services. You're going to be coming out of the military. Where do you want to end up? Where do you want to go? What part of the country? What part of the world do you want to go? That's far more important than what you're going to do. So once you decide where you're going to go, then get real smart on the local community. You got to get smarter than the DA and the county attorney as to what's happening in that community, because that's what you're going to sell. You're going to sell the community and how you can make the community better with all of the skill sets that you have. If you're a sexual assault coordinator in the military, is there a university that's nearby? They're actively engaged in trying to prevent sexual assault on campus. Know the demographics of the location you want to go to in and out. Read their online newspapers. Find out who the prosecutors are. Do they have an office? Do your homework well in advance, because that's going to help you regardless of where you end up. Now, you might be able to do that in one day, Liz. I don't think so, but I would yesterday.
Not me. No. Thank you so much for that answer, sir.
Claire, can you add anything to that, Claire?
I think that it's just adding on to what you're saying. I think that, and I recognize that, if you're active duty right now and you're oftentimes dual-hatted, it's challenging to add one more thing to your plate. I get that. But agencies have really varied requirements in terms of volunteering. You might be able to sign up, and it might work for you and for your family to do one shift a month, or you're on call, either for the local hospital to respond to victims, law enforcement, domestic violence, sexual assault agencies, and you can do it from the comfort of your home, and then you can be called out if necessary. And that's a very small time commitment, but not only does it allow you to make sure that it's a good fit, because one thing I know about, from my own work in the military, SARCs, SAPR VAs and such, is even though you receive a lot of wonderful training, depending upon where you're located, you may or may not have had an opportunity to actually respond to victims. Mm-hmm. So it gives you that critical experience, so that when you get out in 2 years and you leave the service, or when you decide to retire, you have that experience, and you can feel confident when you go in for that interview to say, I've got the training from my military experience. I've got all of my, military experience, which translates really well. And, I'm happy to always look at anyone's resume and help you, figure out how best to model that for civilian agencies. But I've walked the walk, and not only, talk the talk.
Thank you.
Liz, may I offer one last off the wall?
Yes, please, sir.
And this is addressing David, who wants to go to the Midwest, and anybody else who is in this field. You may or may not actively be in victim services, but let me tell you the skills that you have. Consider volunteering at a high school. Claire, let me tell you, my book, an English degree is probably the most valuable thing you could have. My daughter has an English degree. But let me tell you what somebody who has been in the military for so long, who has developed interviewing skills of compassion, skill of understanding, that if they can mentor high school students and help them write, to express themselves emotionally, how they have been able to sustain themselves in an increasingly violent world. And the key is having them express themselves emotionally. Don't write an essay like it's on Beowulf for a senior English class. Write an introspective of what experiences you have had, how you overcame them, and how you're going to conquer the world because of the experiences. Volunteer doing that, and I will guarantee you there is money in the bank for college scholarships. No doubt, I have demonstrated it, because that's the wow factor. We're not used to seeing young people express themselves emotionally anymore, especially on topics that are very difficult to address and conquer. So good luck to all of you who are listening today. I always close, Liz, by telling your listeners that if you and your audience cannot discern the passion that both Claire and I have for what we do, then our microphones are on mute. So thank you so much for having us. It's been a real honor to be with you.
Thank you so much for being here, sir. I just want to do a quick wrap up real quick. If you have additional questions that we did not get to, you can reach out to me at lizljones@bluestarfan.org, or Claire, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
I put my email in the chat, but I'll add it again because I know things have moved along and it's a lengthy email, so I won't. But I'm typing it in, and I also just want to say thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you for your service and your interest in victim advocacy.
I am going to try to type in my.
Yeah.
When I do that, I always accidentally type in Claire's. Thank you, Claire. Okay. I'm going to hope that this went through.
Okay. Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it